Hi there, welcome to part 4 of this tutorial series. Today we're going to be looking at the workflow that you need to follow if you have an existing map. Now, the more you can leave up to Gaia to simulate in terms of the rivers and the mountains, the more realistic the results that you'll get. But I know that many of you will have your Homebrew campaign or a world that you've built, and you already have this existing map that you've been using for years and that you want to replicate accurately. So this tutorial will be a little bit more complicated than the previous ones, but don't worry, I'll take you through this step by step. The main thing that we're going to be doing differently this time is creating a bit more variation in the original height map. And we're also going to have to create a few different masks in Photoshop to be used in Gaia later. So just to give a quick overview, first of all, I've got here a set of layers that correspond just to the land masses. And you can see here, I've got kind of a single block color that I've used for just the main kind of ground level, let's say. And it really doesn't have to be, too accurate or too, pretty looking at this level, at this stage. But just creating two more layers, one for kind of lower elevation areas, and then also higher elevation areas. And we do this, if you remember from part 1, by just choosing a slightly brighter grayscale color for higher areas, and then a lower grayscale color for the lower areas. Just a quick reminder, if you can't remember from the first tutorial, the way that we create at least this kind of initial landmass is done using the magnetic lasso tool. So you would create a new layer, and then using the magnetic lasso tool, follow the coastlines until you've got the landmass selected. And then on the mask layer, you will click fill selection with white. And then this will kind of create what we see here with the kind of gray area covering the main landmass. And of course, as you can imagine, this was quite a bit of work for this map. Lots of tiny islands and things like this will all need to be added in one at a time. In terms of adding in the lowlands and the higher elevation areas, this is done purely just with brushes. Again, I've used a kind of like a textured brush here for the higher areas, just to create a bit of variation. This will look quite ugly in Gaia at first, but we will kind of use blurring and other techniques to kind of make this less obvious. At this part of the map here, you can see that I've actually created quite a hard edge. That's just to reflect, if I turn this off, that's just to reflect the fact that there's a cliff here, for example. So again, it's all about kind of following the sort of visual cues that your map is giving you. Once you're happy with your overall landmass, and if you are starting with a map that doesn't have these kind of sort of, I guess, more subtle changes in elevation already in, you can just skip this part and just have essentially the this kind of view. This is totally fine because we can. In fact, this is better because we can procedurally add some sort of variation to the elevation. But I just wanted to show you this as well, just in case. The next step would be to add the mountains. Now, we've got two potential workflows for adding the mountains. If I just switch this on. So for this map, what I did was I traced round. So if I just sort of zoom in down here, just switch the mountains on for a second, off. Again, just using the magnetic lasso tool, traced round the edges of the mountain on the map. And then just by painting directly onto the color layer here, I just took a lighter color, turned the hardness of the brush right down, and sort of just traced along the ridges that you can see in the top of the mountain. This is just to give a bit more sort of variation to the shape and make them look a little bit more attractive when it comes to processing them in Gaia. And just, being mindful of the fact that, the more hardness you have to your brush, the more stark the elevation change is going to be once we import this into Gaia. So I think I've kind of done a couple of passes here. You can see like once with a larger brush set to quite a, 0% hardness, and then repeating again just to pick out some ridges with a brush set to like 75% hardness or something. An alternative workflow for adding in the mountains layer is to, rather than trace them accurately, there's quite a quicker approach we can take. I think this probably makes more sense. Let's say you've used Wonderdraft or Incarnate or something like that, and you've just got symbols for your mountains rather than this kind of top-down view. I think that in that case, you don't have like particular mountain ridges or something like that you're trying to recreate. So this other method would make more sense. This time round, we're literally just going to take a brush, again, about 75% hardness or perhaps a bit lower than that, but just painting along roughly where you want your mountains to be. And then we're going to use this in Gaia with some other nodes to then create the mountains themselves within that. So this is more of a mountain mask. So whenever we're creating some kind of mask, what we want to do is essentially have either a black or white background and then your color. With the mountain masks, I find it useful. So here I've got a layer called Sea Cutout. So this is essentially the mask for the sea, but just with a white layer, and this is just going to cut out little areas where I've gone over the coastline into the water, and we've kind of removed that there. I'll get onto the sort of sea masks in a bit. But by creating this, and again, it doesn't look attractive right now, and I've only done a few of the mountains rather than tracing them all. But to kind of export our first mask, just go to export, quick export as PNG, and then just give it your name. I've just called it Mountain Quick here, and we can load that into Gaia later. Okay, next we're going to add our water layers. So we'll start with the sea layer, just that's the easiest. So no manual tracing needed this time. We literally just need to duplicate the land layer that we generated earlier. So if you right click, duplicate layer, and then when selecting the mask on the new layer, just click invert, and then that will give you your sea layer. The one other thing you'll need to change is you will need to double click on the preview here to change the color down to black, just to give this the kind of the lowest elevation of the map. In terms of the lakes, this is going to be a similar workflow to the mountains. So I'll just turn this and this off. So here I've created another layer and a mask. I've not gone as all the way down to black, but something that's darker than the surrounding land. And again, just tracing around the original image with the magnetic lasso tool, and then adding it to the layer mask as we've done with everything else so far. The rivers are a little bit more, take a little bit more fine hand work. So again, as with everything else, we will create a new layer, solid color, darker color than the surrounding land. And this time, I'm afraid it is literally a case of manually tracing with the brush tool. So if I just zoom in here, this is going to be a case of carefully following the river with the brush tool, hand painting it in. Use the square brackets on the keyboard to adjust the brush size as you follow it along. This can take quite a while, but if you're strange like me, perhaps you find it quite therapeutic. Yeah, that will create our river layer. And then I actually use the rivers and the lakes twice. Or I find it easier to just create individual masks for the rivers and the lakes, and then use manipulate them in Gaia later. But I also create two versions of the full height map. So if I just switch everything back on. So I tend to create two versions of the height map, one with the rivers and one without. Sometimes having the rivers included as part of your initial height map can make it look better. And sometimes you're better off just subtracting the rivers from the land mass in Gaia later on after the erosion step. But so to kind of summarize all of the files that you'll need to output, we'll want a basic height map where we've got our mountains included if you have the kind of the version with the sort of traced ridges, or if you're using a mountain mask, switch that layer off and have it without the mountains included. And similarly with the rivers, create one with the rivers included and without the rivers included. We'll want to create a mask for the lakes by themselves, for the rivers by themselves. And I've just spotted trees here and the water mask. So I guess we're looking at water now, so let's include that. So the water mask is essentially just creating a version. So we want to have all the land switched off. We just want to see the water, but we need to have the kind of white layer. Oh, got some mountains. So yeah, we need to have the white layer added at the bottom to kind of create that mask. And yeah, we'll save this so that we can if we need it later, which we will, we've got the information of exactly where's water and where's land. Okay, hopefully you're staying with me so far. I know it's a lot of information, a lot of steps. I'm planning on putting together a written tutorial as well, just so that rather than having to kind of keep pausing and stopping the video, you can kind of look at have the steps written down for you. Drop me a comment if you think that will be useful. So the final step I want to look at is creation of the tree masks. You've got a couple of options here. Again, we can do as we did before with the magnetic lasso tool. I've also tried using the color, so you can go to select color range, and then you can essentially select the green of the trees because they're a bit contrasty, and it does an okay job, but it actually pulls a lot of information back that you don't want, and then you can see the names that are on the map as well in this case. So it might work for your map and save you a lot of time, or it might not. So I will probably go ahead with this version over in Gaia. Again, just to sort of save myself a bit of time, I've not gone through and traced every set of trees this time around. So yeah, I guess once you've kind of added in your white background, you can export this one to PNG as well. And then we've got our sort of selection of masks that we'll need later in Gaia and our height maps. So yeah, I will see you in Gaia. One thing that's changed in Blender since the last time we looked at it in our tutorials is that in the build settings, the terrain definition is now working. So essentially we can adjust what value we use for the width, and this will adjust the relative height accordingly. We want this to be a little exaggerated, so I am using just 50,000 meters or 50 kilometers to kind of denote the width of the square. But this just gives the effect I like. So this is what I have it set to. This will be what you need to kind of follow along with the values that I'm using for erosion, etc. But this is something you can update after you've got to your final build. Okay, so once you've got Gaia fired up, I will be just going through a pre-made graph again because this tutorial will take twice as long if I have to try and figure it out while I'm doing it. It's too much for my brain. But the first step will be to add a file primitive. So just go to File, drag that in, and then this one. And yeah, now we can see basically exactly what we created in Photoshop. You can see, like I showed, this kind of, I guess I use like a leaves brush texture or something, but it really doesn't matter. You can see here on these mountains kind of examples of using different brush hardness. So here I've clearly used a harder brush setting than here, where this seems kind of a bit smoother. It will just create sort of slightly different effects when it comes to the erosion. So in order to kind of hide, I guess, some of the hand-drawn nature of this map, we're first going to add in a blur node, just something quite subtle, So just drag this right down. You don't want to go too far because especially things like these small islands and stuff will just disappear. But this will just, yeah, hide some of the kind of clearly hand-drawn nature. I'm going to skip over this combine node because this is for if we take the other mountain route. I'm going to go up ahead to this transpose node. So what this is doing is helping where we had just kind of purely flat land, just because we had a single gray color in Photoshop. We're going to kind of add some details from another node workflow to just kind of create more interesting elevation changes and patterns on the land. So in order to do this, we just first start off with a Perlin node. So again, go to primitives, drag down Perlin, or you can just hit tab and then search for Perlin. I've gone for a billowy noise type, turn the scale right down and the height right up. And I plug this into a Hillify erosion node. So this is just going to take some of the high points and sort of flatten them out because we don't want the whole of the Sword Coast to be this kind of like rugged landscape. I'm going to run some erosion on this just to, again, create some more interesting patterns. And this might not be the most accurate approach to this, but I think it looks nice, kind of taking this and then transposing it onto our original map. Now, by default, this will get the sea as well. So we need to add in this height mask. So whilst clicking on the transpose node, there's this little add modifiers button. I'm going to add mask by height. By default, the fall off will be 0.15. We want to turn that right down to 0 and just nudge this up until you can see like it kind of disappear from affecting the sea. Yeah, okay. So the next step will be to go into the erosion node. But before I do that, I just want to take a look at the alternative mountain workflow. So in order to do that, we're going to use an alternative height map. So we need a version of this height map with the mountains not included. There we go. And then we're also going to create a second, bring in a second file primitive, and this is just going to contain that rough mask. And as I said earlier, I have not done the whole map. I've just kind of done the spine of the world and kind of a few mountains up here. If you want to see how the height map you've created or the masks you've created compare to your input map, you can just load this in directly with a file node and then just right click and use as underlay on the node you want to check. And here we can see, yeah, this is fairly accurately, perhaps it's a bit too generous on the mountains. It's kind of creeping into the surrounding areas a little bit, but I think that's okay. So this blur node, I have kind of remapped the height slightly, just going back and forth a little bit until I get the kind of output I want. So we're going to use this to, we're going to combine this with a Voronoi noise node. So you can see this kind of pattern that's created here. I've done this by turning the scale all the way up to 1. And then one other change is on the transform, I've set both of these to 10. Now, this will depend, the exact value you use here will depend on the map that you're using. So if I set these both to 5, for example, we can see that this has kind of less detail in it now. So equating, I guess, to kind of fewer mountain ridges and peaks. So you just need to pick the scale that works for your map. So I'll put these back to 10. And then we're going to, by dragging out from the Voronoi node into the out of the blur node, and then setting it to multiply and 1, you can see here now that we've just kind of got rough shapes of mountains. They're not meant to look great right now, but just kind of being in the right place. If we just mark this one as underlay, go back to the map, we can then get an idea of if it's roughly in the right area or kind of encroaching on the sort of surrounding spaces too much. But this seems okay. So the next step, if you want to follow this kind of workflow for your mountain placement, you'll just be dragging out from here into the out of the blur node. Actually, it will be the other way around, out from the blur node into the combine node. So we should be able to, on this combine node, it shouldn't really matter which way you do it. You should be able to switch things around by clicking this switch inputs button. But at time of recording, this doesn't seem to do anything. So you kind of have to get it right the first time. And the reason for having it mattering which way around you do this is it means, by having it this way, this slider kind of affects how high the mountains go. But if it was the other way around, it would be adding the main landmass to this the previous step. So once you've got something that you're happy with on the mountains, that's when we kind of go ahead and it will feed into the sort of transpose and then erosion. And yeah, you might need to go back and forth a few times to get the heights just right, again, for the scale of your map. Every map will be slightly different. But yeah, it's like a nice quick way of creating the mountain shapes. But I'm going to go back and use the ones from the original height map. So I'll just reload this one and go through to the erosion step. The next couple of steps are for adding in the water. So you can see how, so even though we had the rivers in our first input height map, the erosion has really, destroyed them. You can sort of see where they were, but they are a shadow of their former selves. So we're just going to put these back in. So we will add in another file node, and this time loading up our rivers mask. Put that into an effects node, and what I've done is I've inverted it and then clamped it right down so that they're just not so not so tall. By default, they'll be up here somewhere. So we'll just clamp this down, and we're going to do two things with it. So the sort of effect that I want to create, I guess this is probably optional, but I want to apply a blur, and by default the radius will be way too high. Turn it right down. I'm going to do a blur, and then going from the out of the erosion to the out of the blur to get this combine node. I'm just going to subtract this just to kind of create a bit more of a pronounced, I guess, sort of slope down to the river. And I guess having the rivers in the original height map might have already kind of done most of this work for us, and then the erosion creating these kind of sort of nice edges to the river. But yeah, this will just do before and after. Just kind of lowers the river down a little bit, because we're then going to go back to the kind of hard version of the river and then subtract that as well. So again, so this time it will be going from the out of this combine node into the out of the effects node. And again, we set it to subtract, and yeah, this just kind of gives that sort of deeper cut. When we come to add the water, this may get filled in a little bit, and it may not. I think generally, yeah, it may be better for the rivers to kind of have it so that it's sort of cutting down a little bit. So we're subtracting a small amount so that there's like a clear defined edge to make it a bit easier to see, but not going so far down that when it comes to texturing and coloring the map, that when we add the blue for the river, it's kind of right down at the bottom of a canyon that you can't see. I find it quite difficult, and I guess we can move on to the sea node next. No, we'll go to the lakes next. So the lakes are quite easy to then fill with the sea node. So we do the same sort of thing. We load up our lakes mask that we created with another file node. Go to adjust to invert it, and then dragging out from the previous combine node into the effects node. We can set it to subtract, and then just kind of move this around. We just want the lakes to be quite deep and obvious, because these will get filled up by the sea node. So yeah, so the lakes and sea will get affected by the sea node. Rivers, probably not. So therefore, let's not make those go too deep. So yeah, so dragging out from that combine node into the sea node. This will take a little bit of time to load up. And you can see actually at this kind of level, there's obviously some lower areas that are then starting to fill up with water. It's not the end of the world if they do. Kind of creates like a little bit of a lake around depending on what we use to color this. So when it comes to kind of coloring the water, we can either use the output from the sea node to mask where the water is, or we can use the water mask that we created in Photoshop earlier to color them. So if you're going to use that water mask, it's not the end of the world if some of the water sort of spills out. But yeah, so I guess just sort of check around. We've got all these islands doing okay. Got the lakes over here filled. It's obviously quite a large sort of drop down to the lake there. This can sometimes happen because of the transpose step. So if I go to the sort of step before, you can see this is all flat, and then the transposer sort of added some sort of interesting areas, but in a place we don't really want. So it would be possible to kind of go back and maybe add a mask to kind of prevent this, but I think this looks okay for now. So I guess that's the kind of all of the water features done. So the next is to add in the trees. So if you remember from before, we need to add in a mask to inhibit where the tree growth is. But unlike last time, so last time we just said we just don't want it in the water, but otherwise we're not that bothered about where the trees grow. We'll let the simulation decide. Now we have kind of specific areas where we want the trees to grow. So we're going to have to combine two things. So we'll have our mask that we created by tracing the trees from the map. And so this will be another file node. Load up the tree mask that you created, and then go into the effects node. And yeah, I've just clicked drop. We just want to create this kind of black and white image. If you ever see this as a height map, but you want it to be a mask, you just need to click these 3 lines here and then come down to select mask. So what this is showing here is inhibit everywhere that's not in black, and these were the regions we found. We kind of traced in Photoshop. But we also want to make sure the trees aren't growing in the sea. So this is where we use our height mask, our water mask, sorry. We've still got this as an underlay. Let's go to that. So we have this water mask. We're going to load this up, and again, we're going to invert it and turn on strong, equalize, and auto level. And this is again just sort of creating white where the water is, and we don't want tree growth. So we can take these 2 masks and then take the maximum from each mask. So white values are higher, so by taking the maximum, we just get the white areas from both. And then what we're essentially left with is our forest, and then we've cut out the rivers so that we don't have the trees growing in the rivers. Okay, now the trees have loaded up. You can see that the trees are actually quite sparse. And this is despite the fact that I've turned them up as high as they'll possibly go. I think this is just kind of a limitation. You know, we're using the maximum number of trees we can use, but we have set the terrain definition to 50,000 meters. This is still much smaller than reality, but it just makes it a little less overemphasized as the default would be. But this means that the trees are looking a little bit sparse. So maybe this looks okay for you. But if you want to kind of make the trees a bit thicker, one little trick I found is if we take the the trees output, and then apply just a very subtle blur to them, then go into an adjust node, auto level and strong. And yeah, you can play with the shaper a bit as well if you want. We can use this as a mask for just introducing a noise node. So the noise node is just found in under primitives, or again, hit tab and type noise. But this kind of gives in my eye, like to my eye, a similar effect to what the trees node is doing. So by combining, I've used the output from the C and combining it with this noise node, setting it to add, and then we can control how much, the height of the trees. But by masking off with that tree's output, it's kind of like each sort of individual tree now is a bunch of noise, and that kind of like merges everything in together a little bit. I can see now that we didn't mask off the mountain when we created this tree mask, so probably we would need to go back into Photoshop and remove that. And perhaps, you can sort of see the river still, but yeah, perhaps that's become a little bit hidden now, but maybe that's a bit more realistic. Maybe the trees are kind of overhanging and they're just not kind of growing in the middle of the river, but it's sort of the branches reaching over. Again, Gaia is a very flexible program, and the more you kind of use it, the more you'll learn, and the more you learn, the more different ways you can solve the problems. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, I've not done all of the trees, but this kind of gives you an idea. The final step I wanted to look at was actually the snow node. So one of the masks that you can create in Photoshop is just kind of painting around where you would want to see some snowfall. And I did this just with a very large brush and with a very low hardness. When you load that in, it looks like this. I actually want to invert this first so that this is giving me more snow in this area. And then this just needs to plug into the snow map. So we would drag out from here with our trees, type snow, and then add this into the snow map. And I've just turned up the melt slightly from the default, and yeah, you can see it kind of filling in here. And yeah, I think in terms of the 3D, there was a lot to cover there, but in terms of the 3D, I think that covers all of it. I think I'll do the texturing in a separate video. I think the texturing in the next video, most of the workflow is now very similar to what we did with our in part 2 with our procedurally generated landmass. But in part 5, I guess, I'll look at kind of how to have like multiple biomes in one map. Spoiler alert, if you want to try and practice yourself, it just involves creating more masks like this snow mask and then masking off the colors when you're blending different sat maps. But I'll cover that in the next tutorial. So yeah, hopefully this has been useful. Give me a like if it was, and drop a comment. There was a lot here, so if anything doesn't make sense, please just reach out to me and I'll see if I can help you in the comments. Thanks very much, and see you in the next one.